Welcome to Conversations with Caleb and Carter. Second topic, war in Ukraine. Because, boy, are we stepping up from profanity as a topic.
This is a big topic right now.
I mean, the development of this channel after just 10 minutes in between recording is incredible. It really is.
Big jumps.
Boy, can you tell we put in the time and the effort. Leave a like and subscribe. Alright, so how this video is going to work is it's just going to be me talking about stuff for a while, and then him giving his thoughts on that, and then we're just going to freelance on that after. So, for the war in Ukraine, I thought it would be important to understand just a general background. I tried not to look too back and far, but that didn't work. So according to a BBC timeline, the first golden age in Ukraine was during the Rurik dynasty, and that was started by Prince Vladimir the Great, which is kind of ironic, but I mean, Vladimir is like a very common Slavic name, so. And also, I should probably add a disclaimer, if I pronounce something wrong, I'm not good at pronouncing words. Alright, moving on.
I'll second that disclaimer.
It's a great idea to start for every video, just always. So from 1772 to 1795, Western Ukraine is almost fully absorbed by the Russian Empire. 1783, Russia annexes the Crimean Khanate, which is basically like the land around the Sea of Azov, allowing for the control of southern Ukraine. Wow, Russia annexing Crimea. Doesn't that sound kind of vaguely familiar?
You really went way far back with this, didn't you?
I did. Well, it's going to jump, don't worry. So then 1918, Ukraine declares independence. 1921, the Russian Red Army conquers 2/3 of Ukraine. That becomes the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The other 1/3 of Ukraine is Poland. In 1939, Western Ukraine gets annexed by the Soviet Union. 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. And then in 1991, Ukraine declares independence during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Again, that's all BBC News. More recent news is from NPR. Despite being poisoned during the 2004 election, Viktor Yushchenko and the Ukrainian citizens prevail, and Viktor becomes the Ukrainian's third president. Yushchenko officially requests for Ukraine to be able to join NATO in January of 2008, but France and Germany go against it. Russia condemns it. You know, same situation as today. And this is just me trailing off, but Yushchenko kind of reminds me of the Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned in Great Britain after speaking out against his former country in Russia. Just throwing it out there. In June of 2010, Ukraine Parliament votes to forget about its dreams to join NATO, but they still have NATO aspirations today, kind of. More recently, it kind of seems like they're not leaning towards that. In 2014, Russia annexes Crimea, and the Donbas region of Ukraine in the eastern side of the country has two separatist forces that declare independence, the Donetsk Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. 2016, cyber attacks on things like power goods began to be utilized by Russia. 2021, April, Russia sends approximately 100,000 troops to the Ukraine border, renews the troop presence in November, and on February 21st, Putin sends troops into Ukraine after recognizing the independence of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. And then February 24th, Russia launches a full-out assault campaign on Ukraine. So one thing that stood out to me was when former Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko said he was being recorded for a Sky News interview, and he said We should understand that this war is not about Ukraine. This war is about U.S., their partners, about the West, about the free world, because nobody knows where tomorrow will appear Putin. And my initial reaction was like, that kind of seems like a bit of exaggeration. This war's in Ukraine. The Cold War didn't have that big of an impact on Ukraine, did it? So that kind of got me thinking, what was like America and the West's general role in the situation that unraveled in the start of March 2022? And of course, a day after I was kind of thinking this, YouTube algorithms recommended a video that would help answer that. So the video is a lecture by John Mearsheimer. It was posted like 6 years ago by the University of Chicago, featuring Professor of Political Science John Mearsheimer, and this is like after Russia annexed Crimea. One of the first things that stood out to me was a map he showed and explained that gave visual representation of the ethnic groups in Ukraine, the two biggest being Ukrainian speaking and Russian. So already there's potential for civil unrest, or at least like differences in language, which is something that I guess is eventually seen by the Donetsk and Luhansk Republic, as those two are Russian speaking primarily, not Ukrainian speaking. As a result of this division, you have the more Russian populated, Russian speaking eastern Ukraine not wanting EU membership or NATO membership, and the west half of Ukraine wanting it. Mearsheimer's main point was that the United States and its European allies are the ultimate cause for this conflict, as they want to incorporate Ukraine into the West. And in this theory, it seems to me like he's suggesting America and the West as the antagonist, and Russia as the guy kind of playing defense. And this is before the actual war. So he points out that the West wants to isolate the Ukraine from the East strategically through NATO and the EU. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. So NATO to have a military, possibly nuclear presence, once again on Russia's doorstep, and the EU to integrate Ukraine into the West's economy, so they're more reliant on the West. Morals aside, not justifying anything because it's obviously wrong, it would somewhat make sense from Russia's perspective, logically speaking, to not want this to happen. But obviously, a full-out invasion is totally wrong. Putin has mentioned, and like it's clear, those aren't the reasons for it at all. And so the third reason is he lists the West for fostering the Orange Revolution, which is kind of just like growing democracy's presence. Again, something Russia doesn't want. He describes the strategy as getting other countries in the crosshairs who don't have democracies with their citizens by promoting democracy. So I always consider the Cold War and American involvement in the Middle East, not including Al-Qaeda, but as America standing up against horrible dictators, not necessarily just like going after different types of governments, but maybe that's like not the only factor. It's like not that clear cut and dry. And I'm not saying like someone like Saddam Hussein is a good guy, but like I'm just saying it's a possibility America had other motives, that there's like a lot of things to go into consideration. So spreading democracy is a good thing, but there has to be a limit. America isn't like the world power for determining governments, and even if we aren't using military enforcement like in Ukraine, actions still have consequences, especially if you accept Mearsheimer's theory that the West is responsible for the tensions. Moving on, he also cites Russia declaring Georgia's NATO membership unacceptable in 2008, and Russia calling it a direct threat. Furthermore, Georgia got into a war with Russia in 2008, thinking the West, they'd have the Western support that was implied by NATO membership, which they did not. So a lot more in that video. You can check it out if you want to, but those were kind of my thoughts on what I thought was most important. And a lot of it is a deeper dive into 2014 and his predictions, which a lot actually turned out to be wrong. As one thing he said was he thought Putin was too smart to ever attempt to conquer Ukraine. And I mean, I think he said something almost directly around the lines of he would never launch a full-out invasion. But as we saw today, he did. So I'm going to hand the table over to you. What are some of your thoughts on that?
One thing I want to point out is I think it's interesting that the U.S. has done largely nothing. Because actually, I don't know if you've looked into this at all, but in around 1994, the U.S. actually made an agreement with Ukraine. It's called the Budapest Agreement. And Ukraine had agreed to empty its nuclear stockpile, essentially.
Yep.
And the US, the UK, and Russia actually guaranteed that they guaranteed Ukraine's safety. And
No, I saw that too. Russia promised, I mean, they obviously went back on their word. They said, you give us your nuclear weapons, we're never going to attack you.
well, even the US went back on it because we said we would protect them. We're not protecting them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a perfect transition into what I think a huge factor into the war is. Obviously, Putin is unpredictable. And he's hinted at threats of nuclear involvement. And I think that really limits the U.S.'s possibility, because do we want a nuclear war?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a tough situation to be in. I don't think we should be putting troops on the ground there by any means at this point, because that could spark a whole other range of issues. But it's just interesting that we've done nothing, largely nothing. I mean, we've sent some
it's almost
weapons.
crazy because, I mean, he even mentioned nuclear weapons when talking about sanctions, which is, I mean, that's not any, like, direct involvement in their invasion.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. But what do you think about the Russian soldiers in general? Because initially I thought it was something along the lines of Russian generals, Putin motivating them, like something along the lines of like, we deserve Ukraine for whatever reason. But it seems to be, on the videos out there, that a lot of the younger Russian soldiers, at least, like teenagers and adults, didn't know they were going into a war. A lot of them thought it was training exercises.
I don't know about that, but I do know, I'm not familiar with that, but I will say that I do think, in general, the Russian people are probably more okay with this.
Well, I think that, I wouldn't even say that's true. If anything, I would say they're afraid to speak out against it. I mean, I saw,
I don't know about that.
like a news organization of people, because, I mean, you speak out against the war, you get shut down. And I saw one thing about people who protested, and then they kind of signed off as their last broadcast, one news station in Russia.
And
then another thing to add to that is, someone I saw in one article that Russian troops, you know, they're trained to lie. So maybe they're lying about thinking it was a training exercise for their own protection. But I think it's more plausible that they're kids, they got manipulated. I know a lot of them, they're forced to join the military too. So it's really not a good situation at all.
I know, like, it's really hard to speak on the citizens' intentions, because we're not the citizens, we're not near the citizens, we haven't spoken with any of the citizens. But I would say I don't think, by and large, that the citizens of Russia are against the war. I will say, this taking it a little bit of a different direction. What do you think about the possibilities of China invading Taiwan now? Do you think that's higher? Do you think that's lower?
I think it's higher, but I think if it was gonna happen, it would have already happened by now. And I
Not
think
necessarily. It takes a while to plan a full-scale assault like that.
we'll see what happens, but I think if China were to invade Taiwan, a full-out war would be inevitable, and hopefully it wouldn't be nuclear. And I think one of the bigger questions raised by this war is, at what point are we willing to allow, I guess, morals to be willing to go as far as like accepting the outcome of nuclear war? Because
At what point are we willing to step in?
yeah, because if you think about it, there is a mass genocide going on in China,
Yeah, the camps.
and that is not something we intervened in at all. So
I would
it's
say by and large, countries are not.
it's thought provoking to think about what.
I'd say by and large, countries are not inclined to interfere with any relations that don't concern multiple countries. So since what was going on in China is by and large a national issue rather than an international issue, I don't think. I think countries are less inclined to do anything.
Well, I mean, of course, they are, but I think, from I guess my moral standpoint, human rights, genocide is a line where I think
interference should
interference
happen, yes.
is necessary at that point.
I think it is necessary that people step in at that point.
And the nuclear weapons existence really has just, everything's kind of stalled.
Isolated some countries in some ways.
When the U.S. interferes with countries, or we go to war with other countries, it's not ones with nuclear weapons. Countries with nuclear weapons eventually occurs. It'll be interesting to see what happens and what was the final straw, I guess. I guess that wraps up everything for this topic.
I'm gonna hope we never come to the conclusion that nuclear warfare is the best outcome.
I don't think it.
I hope it doesn't come to that ever.
I wouldn't call that the best outcome. I would say, if anything, it would be necessary to protect some population, some demographic that's being heavily targeted by someone.
I think any nuclear warfare is a disadvantage to every single country, including the country that sets off the first nuke.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think that concludes our topic, and
just disclaimer, everything we say may not be 100% true. We're just trying to generate a discussion about the topics we talk about.
we try to stay as fairly accurate as possible, but at the end of the day, it is just a discourse.
A lot of it's our opinions, and feel free to let us know what you think too. That's all.